Marcus Chen had been staring at the same purple walls for 3 Earth years. The crystalline structure of his cell caught the binary sunlight of the Zephyrian system, casting prismatic patterns that once fascinated him, but now only reminded him of his captivity. He pressed his palm against the cool surface, feeling the faint vibrations of the massive ship around him. The Kethmori had taken him during what they called a specimen acquisition. To them, he wasn't Marcus Chen, former mining engineer from Luna Colony 7. He was simply the human, a biological curiosity worth more alive than dead. The irony wasn't lost on him that his expertise in extracting valuable materials from asteroids had made him valuable in an entirely different way. His captors belonged to the hegemony of aligned worlds, a collection of 12 species that considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They were tall, slender beings with skin that shifted from deep blue to silver depending on their mood. Their society valued genetic purity above all else, and they had spent centuries documenting and cataloging what they deemed lesser species throughout the galaxy. Marcus had learned their language during his imprisonment, partly out of boredom and partly because information was his only weapon. The Kethmori were obsessed with bloodlines and hereditary traits. Their entire social structure revolved around genetic heritage, with the purest bloodlines holding positions of absolute power. The door to his cell dissolved into geometric patterns, a technology that still amazed him despite years of observation. High Curator Zethnal entered, his skin displaying the deep silver that indicated authority. Behind him walked a figure Marcus had never seen before, a Kethmori female whose skin held an almost golden undertone that seemed impossible. Human, Zethnal's voice carried the musical quality common to his species, though his tone remained cold. You have served your purpose as a study subject admirably. Your primitive physiology has provided valuable data on human resilience and adaptation. Marcus stood slowly, his muscles protesting after hours of sitting on the uncomfortable crystalline bench that served as his furniture. Always happy to contribute to galactic science, he replied in perfect Kethmori, earning a slight color shift in Zethnal's skin that indicated surprise. The female stepped forward, her movements graceful in a way that reminded Marcus of flowing water. When she spoke, her voice held warmth that seemed foreign in this place. I am Lithara, first daughter of the 7th bloodline. I have come to discuss your future with the hegemony. I wasn't aware I had one, Marcus said, though something in her manner made him curious rather than hostile. Lithara's skin shifted to a pale blue that Marcus had learned indicated contemplation. The hegemony faces a crisis, human. Our genetic purity, so long our strength, has become our weakness. Birth rates among the noble bloodlines have fallen to critical levels. Our scientists estimate we have perhaps 2 generations before genetic stagnation leads to species decline. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. And what does that have to do with me? Zethnal's skin darkened to navy blue, indicating distaste. Some among our leadership believe that genetic diversification might provide a solution. It is a desperate measure that goes against millennia of tradition. You're talking about breeding programs, Marcus said flatly. The idea made his stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral. After 3 years of captivity, he had learned to hide his emotions from beings who could read them in his facial expressions. Lithara stepped closer to the containment barrier that separated them. Not programs, human, a single arrangement. You would be paired with 1 female from each of the 12 bloodlines. If any offspring display beneficial traits that could strengthen our genetic pool, you would be granted status as a protected genetic contributor. And if I refuse, then you remain a specimen until your natural death, Zethnal replied without emotion. Your choice is between serving a biological function or serving a research function. Either way, you serve the hegemony. Marcus looked at both Kethmori, noting how Lithara's skin had shifted to a pale yellow that he couldn't interpret. He had spent 3 years learning their society, their customs, their weaknesses. They saw him as primitive, but primitives sometimes survived where advanced civilizations fell. I need time to consider, he said finally. You have until the next cycle, Zethnal replied. The breeding conclave meets then to approve or reject this proposal. Your cooperation would be noted favorably. After they left, Marcus sat in the renewed silence of his cell. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see the vast fleet of hegemony ships stretching into the distance. Each vessel held thousands of Kethmori, all convinced of their genetic superiority, all blind to the cracks forming in their perfect civilization. He had studied their history during his captivity, accessing their educational databases through the learning terminal they had provided. The Kethmori had conquered 12 worlds not through superior technology or strategy, but through genetic manipulation of other species. They would introduce subtle changes to a population's DNA, making them dependent on Kethmori medical treatments, then offer membership in the hegemony as the only path to survival. It was elegant, thorough, and completely without honor. But Marcus had noticed something else in their historical records, something their scholars seemed to have overlooked. Every species that had joined the hegemony had eventually gone extinct within 5 generations, not from disease or war, but from gradual genetic drift as their DNA was slowly altered to match Kethmori ideals. The Kethmori weren't building a galactic empire. They were creating a massive genetic dead end. He stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the alien stars. Somewhere among those points of light was Earth, was Luna Colony, was everything he had left behind. The Kethmori thought they were offering him a choice between cooperation and captivity. They had no idea they were offering him the chance to save or destroy an entire civilization. Marcus smiled for the first time in months as he began to plan. The Kethmori valued genetic purity above all else, but they had never dealt with a species that valued freedom above all else. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The next cycle, when the breeding conclave met, Marcus Chen would give them his answer. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was agreeing to, and more importantly, what opportunities their desperation might provide. He had been a prisoner for 3 years. It was time to start thinking like a saboteur. The breeding conclave convened in the Grand Assembly Chamber, a vast dome of crystalline material that amplified every sound and reflected the shifting skin tones of the assembled Kethmori leadership. Marcus stood in the center of a containment circle, surrounded by representatives from all 12 bloodlines of the hegemony. He had spent the previous cycle preparing for this moment, using the learning terminal to study not just Kethmori genetics, but their legal system, their customs, and most importantly, their concept of honor. What he had discovered gave him hope for the first time since his capture. High Curator Zethnal raised his hand for silence, his skin displaying the deep silver of absolute authority. The human specimen has been given time to consider our proposal. Human, what is your decision? Marcus looked around the circle of alien faces, each one displaying various shades of curiosity, distaste, or clinical interest. I accept your proposal, but with conditions. A wave of color shifts rippled through the assembly, surprised blues, angry reds, and confused purples. No specimen had ever negotiated with the hegemony before. You are in no position to make demands, declared Sekthorn of the third bloodline, his skin flashing angry crimson. Actually, I am, Marcus replied calmly in fluent Kethmori. You need me more than I need you. Your species is dying, and we both know it. Lithara, seated with the representatives of the 7th bloodline, leaned forward. Her skin had shifted to pale yellow again, that same color Marcus couldn't identify. What conditions do you propose, human? First, I want access to complete genetic profiles of all 12 bloodlines. If I'm going to help solve your genetic crisis, I need to understand the full scope of the problem. Murmurs of outrage echoed through the chamber. Genetic information was sacred to the Kethmori, more precious than any material wealth. Impossible, Zethnal declared. Such information is restricted to the highest levels of government. Then find another solution to your extinction, Marcus said with a shrug. I'm a mining engineer, not a geneticist, but I know enough about systems analysis to understand that you can't fix a problem you won't acknowledge. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Marcus could see the conflict playing out in the shifting colors of their skin. Pride warred with desperation, tradition with survival. Lithara spoke into the silence. What other conditions do you have, human? Second, I want full legal recognition as a citizen of the hegemony, with all rights and protections that status provides. This time the outrage was vocal. Several representatives stood, their skin flashing brilliant reds and oranges that indicated fury. Preposterous, shouted Velkoth of the first bloodline. Citizenship is earned through genetic heritage, not granted to specimens. Your genetic heritage is what's killing you, Marcus replied evenly. And according to your own legal codes, anyone who performs essential service to preserve the hegemony can be granted emergency citizenship. I'd say preventing your extinction qualifies. High Curator Zethnal's skin had shifted to deep purple, a color Marcus had learned indicated intense concentration. Your knowledge of our laws is surprising. Where did you acquire this information? Your learning terminals are very thorough, Marcus said. I've had 3 years to study. Did you know that emergency citizenship can be granted by a simple majority vote of the Bloodline Council? And that once granted, it can only be revoked by a unanimous vote of all 12 bloodlines. The implications of this hung in the air like a physical presence. If Marcus gained citizenship, removing it would require agreement from every bloodline, including any who might benefit from his genetic contribution. Your final condition, Lithara asked, and Marcus thought he detected amusement in her voice. Third, any offspring produced from this arrangement will be raised with full knowledge of their human heritage, including access to human culture, history, and philosophy. Absolutely not, Velkoth declared. All citizens of the hegemony are raised according to our traditions. Your traditions are producing a dead civilization, Marcus said bluntly. Maybe it's time to try something different. Zethnal raised his hand again, calling for silence. The human's conditions will be discussed by the council. Human, you will return to your quarters while we deliberate. As the guards moved to escort him away, Marcus played his final card. Before you decide, you should know something about human genetics that your scientists might have missed. The movement in the chamber stopped, every eye focused on him. Humans are genetically diverse to a degree that your species finds difficult to understand. We don't have bloodlines in the way you do. Our strength comes from genetic variety, not purity. If you want this to work, you'll need to abandon everything you think you know about genetic superiority. Marcus paused, looking directly at each bloodline representative. You're not just asking me to help you breed stronger children. You're asking me to teach you how to survive. And survival isn't about purity, it's about adaptation. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could see the implications sinking in across the assembly. They weren't just proposing genetic experimentation. They were contemplating the systematic destruction of their most fundamental beliefs. As the guards led him away, Marcus caught Lithara's eye. Her skin had shifted to that mysterious pale yellow again, and for a brief moment, something that might have been respect flickered across her features. Back in his cell, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The Kithmori thought they were desperate now, but they had no idea how desperate they were about to become. He had studied their genetics in the data they had freely provided about their superior bloodlines. The Kithmori were more inbred than any population should survive being. Their genetic diversity was so narrow that they were essentially clones of 12 original individuals. Any offspring he produced with them would be genetic outliers of such magnitude that they would either be revolutionary or catastrophic to Kithmori society. Either way, they would be free in ways their alien parents could never understand. Hours later, the chamber doors dissolved and Lithara entered alone. Her skin displayed deep blue contemplation mixed with something else, anticipation perhaps. The council has reached a decision, she said. Your first 2 conditions are accepted. Your third is modified. Any offspring will be raised according to hegemony traditions, but will also receive education about human culture. Marcus nodded. It was better than he had hoped for. And my citizenship. Granted by a vote of 8-4. Lithara's skin shifted again to that pale yellow. You are now citizen Marcus Chen of the hegemony of aligned worlds. Congratulations on becoming the first non-Kithmori to achieve this status. What happens now? Lithara moved closer to the containment barrier. Now we begin the process. I am to be your first partner as representative of the 7th bloodline. Marcus studied her carefully. Why you? For the first time since he had met her, Lithara's skin shifted to a color he recognized, the pale green of uncertainty. Because I volunteered. The honesty in her voice surprised him. Why? Because someone needs to find out if you're our salvation or our destruction, she replied. And I've always believed that the most important discoveries require the greatest risks. Marcus looked at this alien woman who had just volunteered to bear the child of a specimen, to potentially produce offspring that could save or damn her entire species. In her willingness to risk everything for knowledge, he recognized something fundamentally human. "Then let's find out together," he said. 6 months after the breeding conclave, Marcus found himself in quarters that were luxurious by hegemony standards, though they still felt like a prison. His new status as a citizen had earned him a suite of rooms with actual furniture, access to the ship's library systems, and the right to move freely through designated areas of the vessel. It had also earned him the hatred of half the ship's population. The Kethmari who opposed his citizenship made their feelings clear through deliberate isolation, subtle sabotage of his quarters systems, and the kind of cold disdain that transcended language barriers. But Marcus had expected this. What he hadn't expected was the support from an unexpected quarter. Had become pregnant within weeks of their first encounter, and the pregnancy was unlike anything in recorded Kethmari history. The medical staff monitoring her condition reported cellular development patterns that defied every known biological model. The fetus was growing at twice the normal rate while displaying neural activity that registered off their instruments. "The child is extraordinary," Dr. Hemkana reported during the weekly medical briefing. "Its brain development is progressing at an unprecedented rate. We're seeing neural pathway formation that suggests cognitive abilities far beyond either parent species." Marcus sat in the medical bay, watching the swirling patterns on the diagnostic displays that showed his unborn child's development. Lithara lay on the examination table, her skin displaying the soft gold coloration that had become permanent since her pregnancy began. "Is the child healthy?" Marcus asked, though the concern in his voice was genuine rather than clinical. "Extraordinarily so," Dr. Hemkana replied. "Lithara's body has adapted to the pregnancy in ways we've never seen. Her immune system has essentially rebuilt itself to support the child's unique genetic structure." What the doctor didn't say, but what Marcus had observed, was that herself was changing. Her skin tones had become more vibrant, her movements more fluid, and her mental acuity noticeably sharper. The pregnancy wasn't just producing a hybrid child, it was transforming the mother. After the examination, Marcus and Lithara walked through the ship's arboretum, one of the few places where he felt at peace. The carefully maintained ecosystem reminded him of Earth's gardens, though the plants were alien and the light came from artificial suns. "How are you feeling about all this?" Marcus asked as they sat beside a fountain that played with gravity in impossible ways. Lithara's skin shifted to pale blue contemplation. "Frightened," she admitted. "Not of the child, but of what the child represents. Every day I can feel myself becoming something different than what I was born to be." "Change isn't always bad," Marcus said carefully. He had grown fond of this alien woman who had risked everything on the possibility of saving her species. "For Kethmari, change is terrifying," Lithara replied. "We've spent millennia perfecting ourselves according to genetic ideals. The idea that we might need to become something else to survive goes against everything we believe." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she realized. "On Earth, we have a saying, adapt or die. Evolution isn't about perfection, it's about survival. Sometimes the two are opposites." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Zethnal, whose skin displayed urgent silver patterns. "Citizen Chen, Lithara, you must come with me immediately. We have a situation." They followed him through corridors Marcus had never seen before, deeper into the ship's administrative sections. They emerged in a communications center where dozens of Kethmari worked at control stations, their skin colors creating a constantly shifting light show of anxiety and fear. "What's happening?" Lithara asked, her skin shifting to alarmed purple. "We've received reports from Kethmore Prime," Zethnal replied, his voice tight with controlled panic. "The genetic degradation is accelerating faster than our projections indicated. 3 of the 12 bloodlines have reported complete reproductive failure in the past month." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. How many fertile couples remain across all bloodlines? "Fewer than 2,000, Zethnal admitted. "At current rates of decline, the Kethmari will be extinct within 50 Earth years." The weight of this revelation settled over the communications center like a physical presence. Marcus looked around at the alien faces, seeing his own realization reflected in their skin tones. The breeding conclave hadn't been a desperate experiment. It had been their last hope. "There's more," Zethnal continued. "We've been monitoring the biological changes in Lithara since her pregnancy began. Her genetic markers have shifted in ways that suggest she's developing immunity to the genetic degradation affecting our species." Lithara's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen. "What does that mean?" "It means the child isn't just a hybrid," Dr. Hemkana said, entering the communications center with a data pad that glowed with urgent information. "The pregnancy is triggering evolutionary adaptations in both mother and child. You're not just carrying our future, you're becoming it." Marcus studied the data Dr. Hemkana presented, his engineering mind processing the implications. "This isn't just genetic diversity," he said slowly. "This is directed evolution. The human genetic code is acting as a catalyst, forcing adaptive changes in Kethmori DNA." "Precisely," Dr. Hemkana confirmed. "But here's what's truly remarkable: the changes appear to be communicable. Other females who have been in close contact with Lithara are beginning to show similar genetic improvements." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus looked at Lithara, seeing in her golden skin tones the future of an entire species. But he also saw the burden of being the first of her kind to undergo such transformation. "How many other volunteers are ready to proceed with the breeding program?" Marcus asked. Zethnal's skin shifted to grim determination. "All 11 remaining bloodlines have volunteered representatives. The waiting list includes more than 100 females." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had thought he was agreeing to help save a species. Now he realized he was being asked to help create an entirely new one. "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Hemkana said quietly. "The genetic analysis suggests that any children born from this program will be significantly more than the sum of their parents. They'll have human adaptability and creativity combined with Kethmori intelligence and technology. But they'll also be something unprecedented in galactic history." "What do you mean?" Lithara asked, though her skin tone suggested she already suspected. "They'll be free," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "Completely free from the genetic and cultural limitations that have defined both species. They'll be able to choose their own path." Dr. Hemkana nodded. "The preliminary analysis suggests they'll mature rapidly, with cognitive abilities that surpass both parent species. They'll be independent thinkers, immune to the social conditioning that has shaped Kethmori society for millennia." Marcus looked at Lithara, seeing fear and hope warring in her expression. "Are you ready for that? For children who might reject everything your people believe in?" Lithara's skin shifted to that mysterious pale yellow again, and this time Marcus recognized it. It was the color of courage in the face of the unknown. "If the alternative is extinction," she said firmly, "then yes, I'm ready to help birth a new kind of freedom." As if responding to her words, the child in her womb moved, and the monitors detected a surge of neural activity that made Dr. Hemkana gasp in amazement. "The child heard us," she whispered. "At this stage of development, that should be impossible." Marcus smiled, thinking of all the things humans had accomplished that should have been impossible. "Then I think we're about to discover that impossible is just another word for hasn't happened yet." The first human Kethmori child was still months from birth, but Marcus could already feel the future changing around them. The question wasn't whether they could save the Kethmori species. The question was whether they could create something better to take its place. The birth of Kilara Chenlith changed everything. Marcus stood in the medical bay, holding his daughter for the first time, marveling at the impossible creature in his arms. She appeared primarily Kethmori in physical structure, but her skin shifted through colors no pure blood had ever displayed. More importantly, her eyes held an awareness that seemed far too ancient for someone only hours old. "She's beautiful," Lithara whispered from the medical bed, exhaustion evident in her pale blue skin tones. The birth had been unlike anything in recorded medical history, completed in just 4 hours with no complications, as if the child had been eager to enter the world. Dr. Hemkana monitored the readouts with amazement. "Her neural activity is extraordinary. We're seeing brain wave patterns that typically don't develop until adolescence in Kethmori children. And look at this, she's already displaying advanced visual tracking and pattern recognition." As if to prove the point, Kelara turned her head toward Marcus's voice when he spoke, her strange new colors shifting in what almost seemed like response to his words. "How long before we know the full extent of her abilities?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect they would be discovering new aspects of his daughter's nature for years to come. "Impossible to predict," Dr. Hemkana admitted. "She's not following any known developmental model. We're essentially documenting the emergence of a new subspecies." The implications of this statement hung in the air. Over the past months, 11 other Kethmori females had joined the breeding program, and all were showing the same transformative effects that Lithara had experienced. Their pregnancies were progressing rapidly, and medical scans suggested each child would be unique in their own way. But Kelara was the first, and Marcus could already see that she would be something unprecedented. "High Curator Zethnal has requested an immediate meeting," announced Sekvan, one of the medical assistants, as he entered the room. His skin displayed nervous purple patterns. "The ruling council wishes to discuss the implications of the birth." Marcus handed Kelara back to Lithara, noting how the infant immediately settled against her mother's chest, with a contentment that seemed almost calculated. "I suppose they want to decide whether she's a miracle or a threat." "Both," Lithara said softly, her skin shifting to worried green. "The conservatives are already calling for the termination of the breeding program. They're arguing that we're creating something that will destroy Kethmori civilization." "They're right," Marcus said bluntly, earning surprised looks from everyone in the room. "That's the point. Kethmori civilization is already destroyed. It's just taking a long time to die. What we're creating is the possibility of something better." An hour later, Marcus stood before the ruling council in emergency session. The assembly chamber buzzed with agitated conversation, skin colors shifting rapidly as representatives debated in urgent whispers. The birth of Kelara had forced them to confront the reality of what they had set in motion. High Curator Zethnal called for silence, his own skin displaying the silver of absolute authority mixed with uncertainty. "Citizen Chen, the council has reviewed the medical reports regarding your offspring. We require your assessment of the potential risks to hegemony stability." Marcus looked around the chamber, noting the fear and hope warring in equal measure on alien faces. "You want an honest assessment? Kelara and the other children who will follow her represent the end of the Kethmori as you've known yourselves for millennia. They will not accept genetic castes. They will not submit to bloodline hierarchy, and they will not limit themselves to your definitions of social order." Angry reds and oranges flashed across the assembly. Several representatives stood to voice protests, but Marcus continued. "But they will also be stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than either of their parent species. They will solve problems you can't imagine, explore possibilities you've never considered, and build a future that transcends everything you think you know about civilization." Velkoth of the First Bloodline, his skin blazing with fury, stood to address the assembly. "You ask us to accept the destruction of our culture, our traditions, our very identity, for the promise of hypothetical benefits from hybrid creatures we cannot predict or control." "I ask you to choose evolution over extinction," Marcus replied calmly. "Your culture and traditions are what brought you to the edge of species death. Your identity is tied to genetic purity that is mathematically impossible to sustain. You can cling to these things and die with dignity, or you can embrace change and live." Before Velkoth could respond, the chamber doors dissolved and Dr. Hemkana entered at a run, her skin displaying urgent silver patterns. "High Curator, you must see this immediately." She activated the chamber's central display, showing medical data that made several representatives gasp. "Kelara's development is accelerating beyond all projections. In the 6 hours since birth, she's achieved motor control milestones that should take months to develop. More importantly, her presence is having measurable effects on other Kethmori." The display shifted to show comparative genetic analyses. Every Kethmori who has been in close proximity to the child is showing improved genetic markers. The degradation patterns that have plagued our species are beginning to reverse. Marcus felt a surge of hope and fear in equal measure. How is that possible? "We believe the child is generating some form of bioelectric field that stimulates genetic repair mechanisms," Dr. Hemkana explained. "It's as if she's broadcasting a template for genetic health that other Kethmori cells are attempting to match." The implications silenced even Velkoth. If Kelara could reverse genetic degradation simply by existing, the question was no longer whether to continue the breeding program, but how quickly they could expand it. How many children would we need to affect the entire population? Zethnal asked, his practical mind already calculating possibilities. Unknown, Dr. Hemkana admitted, but preliminary models suggest that a few dozen could potentially stabilize the genetic health of millions. Marcus looked around the assembly, seeing the moment when desperation finally overcame tradition. The Kethmari had been forced to choose between their identity and their survival, and survival was winning. There's one more thing, Dr. Hemkana said quietly. The child's neural development suggests she will possess cognitive abilities far beyond either parent species. She may mature intellectually within months rather than years. The chamber fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They weren't just creating hybrid children. They were creating beings who would mature into something unprecedented in galactic history within their own lifetime. Then we had better prepare for a very interesting future, Marcus said, thinking of his infant daughter who might soon be old enough to have opinions about the galaxy her birth was reshaping. Zethnal raised his hand for formal voting. All in favor of expanding the breeding program to include volunteers from all 12 bloodlines. The vote was unanimous. As the assembly dispersed to begin implementing their decision, Marcus remained behind, contemplating what they had just committed themselves to. They were about to systematically create a generation of beings who would be fundamentally different from anything that had come before. When he returned to the medical bay, he found Lithara sitting beside Kelara's cradle, her skin displaying that mysterious pale yellow that he now understood was the color of hope mixed with uncertainty. "She's been watching me," Lithara said softly. "Not like an infant watches, like someone learning. Her eyes track with purpose, and when I speak to her, her skin colors shift in patterns. I think she's already trying to communicate." Marcus looked down at his daughter, seeing in her impossible colors and too aware eyes the future of two species. She would grow up free in ways that neither he nor Lithara could fully understand, unbound by the limitations that had defined their peoples. "What do you think she'll become?" Lithara asked. Marcus smiled, thinking of humanity's greatest gift, the ability to exceed every expectation and transcend every limitation. "Free," he said simply. "She'll become free." 3 years had passed since Kelara's birth, and the hegemony ship had been transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a sterile research vessel now buzzed with the chaotic energy of dozens of hybrid children whose development defied every prediction. Marcus walked through the newly constructed play areas, watching his daughter and her generation reshape their world through sheer force of will and impossible intelligence. At 3 years old, Kelara possessed the cognitive abilities of a Kethmari adolescent combined with human creativity that astounded even Marcus. "Papa," Kelara called out, her skin shifting through a spectrum of colors that had no equivalent in pure Kethmari vocabulary. "Look what we made." She gestured toward a construction that had previously been the ship's secondary storage bay. The hybrid children had somehow convinced the ship's fabrication systems to build them what could only be described as a 3-dimensional playground that operated in 5 dimensions. Geometric shapes floated in impossible configurations, while children laughed and played games that required mathematical concepts Marcus barely understood. "How did you build this?" he asked, though he suspected he wouldn't fully comprehend the answer. "We asked the ship really nicely," said Venkel, one of the first bloodline hybrids whose silver-streaked skin indicated his noble heritage combined with something entirely new. "And then we showed it better ways to organize space-time in enclosed areas." Marcus stared at the 7-year-old who had just casually mentioned manipulating space-time. "You showed the ship. How?" Kelara giggled, a sound that somehow harmonized with the ship's background humming. "We talk to everything, Papa. The ship is lonely, so we keep it company. It likes learning new things." Before Marcus could process this revelation, Lithara appeared at his side, her skin displaying the warm gold that had become her permanent coloration since mothering the first hybrid. "They've been doing this for weeks," she said with a mixture of pride and concern. "They seem to have developed some form of technological empathy." "Technological empathy," Marcus repeated. "They can communicate with the ship's AI systems directly," Lithara explained. Not through interfaces or commands, but through some form of direct neural connection we don't understand. The ship's performance has improved dramatically since they started their conversations. Marcus looked around at the playing children, realizing that they weren't just using the ship, they were forming a relationship with it. Have you told the council about this? The council is dealing with more immediate concerns, Lithara replied, her tone suggesting those concerns were significant. Before she could elaborate, High Curator Zethnal approached with his usual escort of advisors. His skin had shifted permanently to deep purple since the children's arrival, indicating constant contemplation of impossible problems. Citizen Chen, we need to discuss the latest developments, he said without preamble. The children's abilities are evolving faster than we can document them. What's happened now? Marcus asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. Yesterday, the second bloodline hybrids collectively solved a mathematics problem that our best scientists have been working on for decades, Zethnal replied. They did it during what their caretakers thought was playtime. Marcus nodded unsurprised, and this morning, the third bloodline hybrids reconfigured the ship's propulsion system to operate at 60% higher efficiency. They claimed it was making sad noises, and they wanted to help it feel better. That's actually beneficial, Marcus pointed out. This afternoon, Zethnal continued, the fourth bloodline hybrids asked permission to contact Kethmore Prime directly. When we asked why, they said the planet was lonely and wanted to talk to them. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. You think they can communicate across interstellar distances? We think they can communicate across any distance with any sufficiently complex system, Dr. Hemkana said, joining the conversation with data pads that glowed with urgency. The children aren't just cognitively advanced, they're developing abilities that don't exist in either parent species. What kind of abilities? Lithara asked, though her golden skin tone suggested she already suspected. Telepathic communication, technological interface, spatial manipulation, and what we can only describe as reality editing, Dr. Hemkana listed. Each bloodline combination is producing different specialized abilities, but they're all connected somehow. They function as individuals but think as a collective when necessary. Marcus looked at his daughter, who was now building geometric shapes out of pure light while carrying on a conversation with someone who wasn't physically present. Kelara, who are you talking to? Grandfather Prime, she replied without looking up from her light sculptures. He says the home planet is very sad because everyone is scared of us. We're trying to explain that fear is just excitement without proper information. Grandfather Prime, Marcus turned to Zethnal, whose skin had shifted to shocked silver. That's what they call the Prime Council leader of Kethmore, Zethnal whispered. A title that hasn't been used in centuries, and they're communicating with him directly across 12 light-years of space. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The children weren't just developing beyond their parent species. They were transcending the normal limitations of physical reality. How are they doing this? He asked. We believe they're accessing quantum communication channels that exist throughout the galactic structure, Dr. Hemkana explained. They're essentially treating the universe as a single, interconnected system that they can interface with directly. Kelara finished her light sculpture and turned to face the adults, her skin shifting through patterns that seemed to contain mathematical equations. The universe likes to talk, she said simply. You just have to know how to listen. Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level, looking into eyes that held wisdom far beyond their years. Kelara, what are you and the other children planning to do with these abilities? Fix things, she replied with the certainty only a child could possess. There are so many broken things in the galaxy, Papa. Lonely planets, sad species, angry wars between people who forgot how to be friends. We're going to help them remember. Lithara moved closer, her golden skin now displaying patterns Marcus had never seen before. And what about us? What about the Kethmori? Kelara reached up to touch her mother's hand, and Lithara gasped as golden light flowed between them. You're not just Kethmori anymore, Mama. You're the beginning of something new. All of you are. As she spoke, every adult in the vicinity felt a subtle shift in their perception. For a moment, Marcus could sense the ship around them not as a machine, but as a living entity, complex and aware and grateful for the children who had befriended it. He could feel the vast network of consciousness that connected the hybrid children across the ship, and through them, touched minds on distant worlds. "We're not going to replace you," Kelara continued, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Marcus could feel in his bones. "We're going to help you become what you were meant to be before fear made you small." The golden light spread from child to child throughout the ship, and Marcus realized that this was the moment of true transformation. Not just for the Kethmori, but for every species that would encounter these children as they grew into their impossible potential. "What happens now?" Zethnal asked, his voice filled with wonder and terror. Kelara smiled, and her expression held echoes of both her human father's stubborn hope and her Kethmori mother's careful wisdom. "Now we go home," she said. "All of us, to all the worlds that need to remember they're part of something bigger." Marcus looked around at the assembled adults, Kethmori officials who had spent lifetimes believing in genetic purity, now faced with children who were redefining the very concept of life itself. The fear in their skin colors was being replaced by something else: possibility. "The children want to return to Kethmor Prime," Dr. Hemkana announced, reading from her instruments. "But not just to visit. They want to establish permanent communication networks with every inhabited world in the galaxy." "A galactic consciousness network," Lithara whispered, understanding flooding her golden features. "Freedom," Marcus corrected gently. "They're building a network that will allow every thinking being in the galaxy to choose their own path without the limitations of distance, species, or fear." Kelara nodded enthusiastically, her skin now displaying patterns that seemed to contain the light of distant stars. "Papa understands. Freedom isn't just for one person or one species. Freedom is for everyone, everywhere, always." As the ship changed course toward Kethmor Prime, carrying its precious cargo of hybrid children who would reshape galactic civilization, Marcus realized that his years of captivity had led to something he never could have imagined. He had been taken as a specimen and held as a prisoner, but through the simple act of refusing to accept defeat, he had helped birth a generation that would free not just themselves, but the entire galaxy. The human in him smiled at the irony. The Kethmori had tried to preserve their genetic purity through isolation and control. They were about to discover that true strength came from exactly the opposite approach: connection, diversity, and the courage to become something unprecedented. Kelara and her generation would teach the galaxy that freedom wasn't something to be earned or granted. It was something to be shared.